Hello, welcome to Ascending to the Ancestors, my live stream on the History, Health and Wellbeing channel. Today, my regular partner Marion can't be with us today, unfortunately. She's come down with laryngitis, so we wish her very well. But I've got somebody else joining me right now, a man called Sal March, who is a kinesiologist, a healer, and a very interesting chap. So I will bring him on now.
Well,
Hello,
thank you very much for that introduction.
hello. How you feeling? All
Hi,
right?
all. Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Excellent, brilliant. Okay, so we were just talking off camera really about what this stream is about. It's called Ascending to the Ancestors, um, and the basic kind of premise behind this idea is to explore the ways in which our ancestors were better off, the things that we may have lost that we could do with now, and also to look at our present time and what's good about our present time, what's not so good about it, and kind of molding the best of the past with the best of the present to create a better future, if you see what I mean. That's my idea anyway. So,
Yeah.
Sal, um, would you be able to give us your thoughts on possibly what our ancestors had that we've lost? What would you say
Okay.
to
All right. Well, first of all, I should say that I know nothing. I'm pretty ignorant. However, for many years now, I've been in regular communication with, for lack of a better word, I call him Charlie. It's a 12th dimensional soul. And because he's not my immediate soul, but one soul above, he's able to look into the past and share information with me for us, which he has been doing for quite a while. And I've written numerous articles on the subject. So when you first shared with me, oh, this is what we would talk about our ancestors, I thought, oh shit,
that?
ancestors, you know, for the last 7,000 years, the world has been in turmoil, a bit longer. The world's been in turmoil. We've descended to the pits. I'm not sure I can say anything positive there. However, fortunately, Charlie has shared information with me which goes much further back in time and of immediate interest to us would be around 20 something years back. And around 12,000 years ago, roughly 13,000, a bit less, whatever, there was a cataclysm.
Mhm.
And there had been a previous civilization, which I think is fair to call them the Atlanteans, for lack of a better word, but they were a single civilization. Um, the amount of people we have in the world today, 7 billion plus, this is new. For hundreds of millions of years, civilizations have come and gone, but they've never gone higher than 100 million. This is the first technocratic civilization that we have. And in a way, it's rather interesting because it is at the moment a civilization which is a civilization of mind. Mind as in the ego, mind as in regurgitated belief systems, minds as in indoctrination, mind as in don't think for yourself, do
Mhm.
what you're told. And computers are the pinnacle of this concept for us. I'm not saying computers are bad as in terms of development, but at the moment, the highlight of computers is sharing with us. This is the world that we are creating. This is the reality that we've created, whereby parrot speak is all that matters. You do what you're told, you say what you've been taught to think, so there's no individuality per se.
Mhm.
Clearly, not true for the whole world, but for a large proportion it is. So going back in time, previous civilizations, they were interested in spirit, not in mind. And the reason for this is that because the amount of population was small, relatively speaking, and the proportion of higher level souls was greater than new souls, souls which are coming into a body to experience life, who have, first of all, they have to learn how to manipulate the body, work with the mind, work with the emotions, work with the physical body. It takes time. And even today, we can see that not many people do very well with it. Especially today, we see not many people do very well with it. But there was the amount of young souls in relation to the whole was very tiny. And so even though young souls came in subject to the fears of the body, because the bodies are very efficient, nevertheless, they had guidance and they were, yeah, okay, so they're a little bit sociopathic, but there are very few of them and they're managed. And so the focus on being in life, communicating with soul, being one with nature, being open in one's heart, all of that was paramount. That is what was central. And as a result of that, although they had their ups and downs in terms of climate change, nothing new here.
Mhm.
So sometimes they had a lot of snow, a lot of ice. Sometimes it was very hot, and people pretty much they moved. They mostly settled over North Africa area, all the way across, going towards Syria. So that was the usual area where they managed. Um, but their focus was on life, family, experience, and basically being nice with each other. There was no need to try to steal other people's resources. There was no need to go out there looking for trouble because their focus was on relationships, opening of one heart, and literally being able to see the world as it is, something that we're sorely lacking today. And as a result of that, they did have awareness of healing in a way which pretty much disappeared and is sort of come back to the fore now, but it sort of disappeared for a long time. And I will, before I move on to you, I'll just say this little bit that it's interesting to note that there was only one race. However, after the cataclysm, the survivors, first of all, they they had a reasonably good time for about 1500 years. And then we had the a little mini glacier ice age came on again, and things sort of went downhill a bit. They receded, and then we had the floods when those glaciers disappeared or pretty much disappeared. So we then had the big floods, and then there was a diaspora, and these remnants of Atlantis dispersed worldwide. And as a result of this dispersion within, and this is perhaps hard to realize, but within the last 10,000 years, what was one race has become five, seven races, however many different variations we have at the moment. Yeah.
Mm.
And what we don't appreciate is how versatile the human body is to mold itself to its environment, wherever, whether it's cold, whether it's hot, whether it's windy,
Mm.
whatever the environment, we have an amazing ability to mold ourselves.
Mm.
Right, I've said enough for the moment.
Absolutely fascinating. I think two things that our ancestors didn't have, and they were far better off for it, are one, government, and two, television. I think these two things are probably the worst two things, or maybe the banks as well. But do you think? I mean, because governments have only been around for about, I don't know, 400 years maybe. So when we go back, sort of thousands of years, people seem to be getting on very well without government. Do you think
Well,
do you think that people need to be governed?
I usually try to avoid political dimension. Um, I've struggled with this one. I've gone through various phases throughout my life. I'm 70 now, so I've experienced quite a few different facets of my ignorance. And there was a stage when I said, I am an anarchist. Um, Now I lean more towards being a conservative, but there are reasons for this. I'm still an anarchist at heart, but an anarchist in the sense of I don't want to be told what to do by anybody. I'm not a child. I'm an adult.
Mm.
Governments are a way of controlling the population. You know, what is it they say about democracy? Is two wolves and a turkey discussing what they're going to eat for Christmas.
Or also there's was it two ugly cheeks on the same arse?
I haven't heard that one.
Which pretty much sums it up for me, but there we are.
Yeah. So it's,
Mhm.
however, it is true that we never had governments before the Atlanteans, but we have had governments since, and this is the difficult one, since the young souls began to take control. Yeah. And this happened after the diaspora. It gradually has been growing and growing and growing. And I call these the sociopaths, the psychopaths. These are people who have a quest for power, control, to manage everybody else.
Mm.
And they have some excuse or other. Like, if we don't manage you, you are going to go and commit atrocities. Hello, who's committing atrocities? And to manage you, we will commit all these atrocities to bring you under one umbrella, under one group. And this has been the history of humanity for the last 7, 8, 9,000 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Groups fighting groups for possession, for resources, for someone to be top dog.
Mm.
And governments have arisen out of this. And if you look at a government today, governments are bureaucratic institutions which, by their own definition, create more and more laws to curtail people's freedoms for your benefit, of course. They're
Yeah.
trying to help you.
Well, I mean, anarchy just means no rulers, doesn't it? That's all it means. But I suppose you couldn't just go from where we are now to that overnight. It would take some
No.
time. But what about if, I mean, it's the actual kind of structure of government at the moment that is the problem. There are lobbyists that bribe government officials, and it's just also corrupt. So I would suggest, rather than government, we just set up some sort of committee where there's elders like yourself, and there's people on this committee that are do-gooders, nice people, and that would be probably the best way forward. What do you
A
think?
good rule of thumb, never be guided by someone who wants to guide you. Yeah. Choose
Mm.
the ones who don't want to, the ones who don't want to know, the ones who are not interested. Listen to them.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. But I mean, if whenever I brought these conversations up before with people say things like, well, who would fix the roads? Who would build the hospitals? Well, I would say that we can. We could just do it. You know, we could look up some road builders in the I don't know, online or in the yellow pages or whatever, and just get the job done. I just really think that government has become a deeply corrupted, overblown kind of animal, and it's just kind of
Corporate animal.
yes, exactly. And it's taken us down. You know, it's we're really going downhill fast. So um, I just like the idea of anarchy in the sense of no rulers, but having that committee of elders or committee of good people to make sure that things get done the right way. That's just my idea. I've also suggested on this program that people get together in their local communities and talk about the issues that we've got today and to come up with solutions, because I strongly believe that if you put together, say, 7 or 8 people that actually, you know, genuinely care about these things, they would easily be able to come up with better solutions than what the government provide us with. So
Okay.
I think people need to get more involved in these kind of matters now, because we're so kind of the way we live our lives now. The average person gets up, goes to work, works long hours, father and mother. You know, it's both sexes now. They're finding very little spare time for themselves. They get home exhausted. They've got to cook a dinner. By the time everything's done, they collapse in front of the television, which is bad news. And it's just this never-ending cycle that people are stuck in, and we need to break free of that. We really, really do, if we're going to move forward. So
Can I make a suggestion here? Well,
you
can
can
I share some of my perception?
please do.
It's not straightforward. Okay, it's not straightforward. There really are a lot of people on this earth today, and so we do need good roads if you want to go from A to B. Um, I I'm more of a mystic type than a political animal, and I like to look at the world from the perspective of my inner world and how it's reflected externally. And my body is composed of internal organs, and it's got an army, it's got the lymphatic system, it's got the white cells floating about, and they all work in harmony. They're all different groups, but there is an overall communication. The hormonal system keeps everything communicating with each other. So there's a communicating system there. Um, but we do have problems. The problems is that human beings should really be ruled by their heart. Instead, we're either ruled by our gonads, or we're ruled by belief systems that dictate how to be in the world, to the detriment of our creativity and freedom of expression.
Mm.
And governments, religions organizations, schools, they all conspire to limit our freedom of expression. They mean well I'm sure they mean well in their various ways, but because they are led by people who themselves lack the creativity and the inner freedom, then they are subject to their fears and to their pain and to their suffering. And so they make choices which are by and large sociopathic and psychopathic, because they're not for the good of people, they're good for their little group, for themselves, the ones they rub shoulders with. At the same time, we all have an aura surrounding us, and that defines a personal space. And so we all need to have boundaries as individuals as well as collective. And the respect of boundaries is really, really important. And the average human being has no problem accepting this concept that we need to have boundaries that define our interaction. Some time back, my oldest boy, who lives in America, um, he was going on about how the all these migrants were coming into America and how it was really, really good. And I was against the idea of just people just coming into the country just like that. You could call me a conservative for that belief. But I was coming from the point of view of boundaries. And sometime later, the conversation came to buying a house and living within an enclave. And I said, you know, if you lived within a block where you all had to share various things as a block, I don't think you'd be very happy if someone that you knew absolutely nothing about came in and decided to squat in one of the empty flats.
Mm.
And yes, he was definitely not for that.
Mm.
And I said, well, it's the same with you got the boundaries of your nation, of your country, of your town, wherever, and you've got these aliens coming in without consultation, without asking, without arrangement, without agreement, and they just dump themselves on your doorstep and take your resources because they're needy. And I said, that is an invasion of boundaries.
Mm.
So it's a tricky one, you see, but this is the result of so many of us in the world.
Mm.
There are too many people. When we were 100 million, 50 million, like the Atlanteans, you know, they were around 50 million towards the end. 50 million people, well, you know, spread across the whole of North Africa, which is pretty large space. It's not an issue. It's not a problem. And in fact, when they were building the pyramids, um, people did come from other villages to join in the endeavor. There was no, you know, the pyramids were not built 3,000 years ago. They had been built in stages around 15,000 years ago, a little bit less. I'd have to look at the timeline, but roughly around 15,000 years ago, they were building them. And they did them in stages. They had three pyramids in stages. And people came, by the time the second pyramid was built, people came from other villages to come and help. And it was a community effort. It wasn't a whip because someone's in charge. It was, this is a great idea and we want to help. So what you can do with it when there's only a few people in the world is not the same as when you've got 7 billion. So it gets a little bit complicated, especially when out of this 7 billion, there's a 1/3 of the population who are very young souls who happen to be in charge. They're the ones who are ruling the roost. So it gets complicated.
That's interesting. So you say there's too many people in the world, and that is a very common kind of sort of idea that's been going around for a while now. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I do question that idea. I wonder if if the resources of the world weren't owned by corporations and we had governments and things like this, would we be in the same mess? Would 7 billion people in the world be an issue if we weren't being managed by psychopaths?
Okay. So we need to put, you know, your whole idea of the ancients, you know, is wonderful because we do need to broaden our vision. And when I say there's 7 billion in the world, I'm not saying there's too many of us in terms of resources, because the whole of the world population, my son told me once, and I looked it up, that they could all stand in Texas
Hmm.
and they would have about 1,000 square meters around them.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So in theory, I mean, okay, there wouldn't be, you know, you couldn't all live in Texas, but just to put that into perspective, the amount of people there are in relation to the space in the world, yes, there is room. Of course, there's room. But nevertheless, 7 billion people does require different logistics from when you've only got 50 million.
Mm.
And there is a reason why there's so many of us right now, because something is coming in the future, not too far future from now.
Right.
And so this is a special event that's going to happen. And yes, from so many previous lifetimes, souls are now here getting ready for what's going to happen. And this is why there's so many of us.
Mm.
And from the point of view of the logistics, it's a difficult one, especially because of the way the world is. But the world is the way that it is because we are being run by those who should be treated like children rather than the adults.
Mm.
And so the world is Alice in Wonderland. It's topsy-turvy, topsy-turvy. And it is a reflection of our collective experience. So although a third of the world population is young souls and 2/3 of the world population have been here quite a few times, and it wouldn't take much for them to learn the ropes on how to separate from ego, connect with their heart, so they have a soul experience. Most of them have been so conditioned from childhood that they are unable to see the wood for the tree. They are indoctrinated. They feel, however, things are changing. They are indoctrinated not to question, not to look inside themselves, not to move away from being a victim, and to take back our power as sovereign individuals. So it is an exciting time. It
Mm.
is.
Mm.
I just read the bit at the bottom.
Hello, Lisa. There's an episode of Star Trek where Kirk Spock realised they need to treat an entity as a child.
Very good.
So are you sorry? Are you saying that? So I absolutely agree that we all need to go within, as you're saying. That's absolutely key. So would we be better off living in a world or a society where we focus on the individual? Because at the moment we're living in a collectivized society where the group is more important than the individual. So do we need to completely reverse that?
Well, I'm going to question that. The group, this is a slogan. The group is more important than the individual, but it's totally untrue.
Mhm.
For example, Bill Gates, if I dare mention such a name, he's talking about climate change, and he's very busy going everywhere, giving lots of money to alter the environment because of these fears of climate change. Our goal is exactly the same. Now, these people who are so vociferous in telling us how we should stop breathing because we're emitting too much carbon dioxide or methane if you have too many vegetables, then they're the ones who nevertheless are going hither and thither on their private planes.
Mm.
They've got massive mansions.
Mm.
You know, don't just talk the talk, walk the talk. They don't. So they preach for the rest of us how to be, but they themselves, because this is only an opinion, they're sociopaths. They don't really care about the rest of us. So they say we're doing this for the group, but the reality is they're doing it for
Mm.
themselves. They're doing it for their own little elite
Mm.
group.
For power.
So, the whole subject of for the better, for the good of the group, nah, they're not. Don't believe it, okay? You should believe very little of what you hear out there.
But moving forward, would we be better off focusing on a society where it's focused on the individual. This is something that I'm trying to examine at the moment and trying to kind
Okay.
of decide what's best. And I'm still kind of learning about individualism. But it would seem to me that groupthink and collectivism is a major problem in our world.
Okay. The problem becomes very clear when we look inside ourselves. Because when I look inside myself, I can see I've got an ego. I've got self-interests. Of course I have. It's an organic need within my system. There is more to me than that. And so I can separate from my ego and I can laugh at my ego and I can appreciate the childishness of my ego. And so I can put myself in context, not all the time, of course. I've got my off moments like new moons and full moons, but by and large, I can manage that. And so the problem that we have at the moment is that there are many older souls, for the lack of a better word, who are waking up to the fact that they're lying to us. All these people in power, whatever the government, they're lying to us. They have their own self-interest. And they're lining their own pockets, and they really have no interest in us. We are an encumbrance. Anyway, the point is that all these older souls are waking up to this, but not fully. But within themselves, they still haven't come to terms with who they are. And what I mean by this is we need to be able to look inside ourselves and like who we are.
Absolutely.
We need to be able to appreciate who we are. We need to accept ourselves with all our foibles. None of us are perfect. None of us will ever be perfect. We'll always have little emotional tantrums. That's always going to
Mm.
happen for all of us. We need to be able to be truthful with ourselves, accept ourselves, forgive ourselves, and stop being victims in the world. Recognize that we all create our own reality. And this is why I'm saying this, that the collective reality is one that's ruled by ego. And so, although there is this, all the souls which are waking up, they're still ruled by ego. And these older souls, they're waking up and saying, I don't want governments to tell me what to do. I'd like to go and live in a commune, in a community. And I know people who've done that. And the problem is they're still lost in their own egos. Even though they're trying to wake up, even though they're more informed, even though they have moments of lucidity when they are connected with their hearts, in truth with their hearts, not just with the gonads, but with their hearts. Nevertheless, when a group of them come together, they have to relate with each other, and all their internal problems which they have not resolved, all the dark shadows within their psyche that they have not resolved, they project them into the group. So now you've got this commune, and within a few years they're at loggerheads with each other because their internal world is being manifested externally.
Mm.
So I'm hoping that all of this will change, but we need to be realistic that to get to this place, and what you say is very true, this is what we need to do. But to get to this place, we first of all need to get inside our own hearts, and we need to forgive everything in
Yes.
ourselves. We need to be able to look at ourselves and laugh.
Mm.
And when we can do that, then we can begin to say, okay, well, let us integrate with the group. And I in my life, I've had a number of women that I've lived with, married a couple, and I had huge problems with all of them because our relationships were not based on love. They were based on need. They were based on our shadows, on our fears and our expectations. Only now do I have, touch wood, only now do I have a wife, a relationship, a lover, a companion who I am truly compatible with, and we're different, and we are different.
Mm.
What the way I am and the way she is, we're quite different. Nevertheless, our differences strengthen us, but we don't project onto each other our worst traits.
Mm. Let's hope she's watching, eh? That was lovely.
She'll, she'll listen. She normally listens to my.
I completely agree with you, Sal, and I couldn't have said that better myself. Self-love is so important. I completely agree. It's a lesson that I've learned over the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, um, and it's absolutely essential for all of us to move forward and to
Yeah,
build a better future. So, just before we move on, I just wanted to ask you something
sure.
because you briefly mentioned the pyramids earlier, and I'm absolutely obsessed with megaliths and pyramids and ancient history. So, um, when let me get this right. So, when you're meditating and you're in communication with, is it Eric or Charlie? Both.
Both.
Okay. But if you wanted to ask a question about the
Yeah,
past, who would you be
yeah.
speaking with?
I would speak with Charlie. Eric, who's my immediate soul fragment, he can only give me information about me, and he can also tell me when I am or I am not in touch with Charlie,
Okay.
because Charlie's not there all the time, but he's there when I need him. So he knows when I need him, and when I need him, he's there. But I always double check with Eric whether Charlie's there, because the last thing I want is for my ego to begin making fantasies. So I always double check, and I don't need to meditate. Usually, Charlie and I engage when I work with clients, whether it's in the therapy room or through Zoom, um, and when I'm writing articles. So when I'm writing, Charlie and I are one,
Mm.
and a lot of what comes into my head comes via Charlie, but I always double check to make sure that I'm not fantasizing, because it can get a little bit weird. Because uh, Charlie tells me things, and I thought, my God, like when he first told me about the pyramids, I looked it up online. Everybody says the pyramids were built in the last 4,000 or 5,000 years. And here my Charlie's telling me that no, they were built 15,000 years, and there's a
Mm.
timeline. I've written a very long article, 3 articles on the pyramids on the website on that particular um, history. There's another bit that Charlie told me. He told me that um, whales, dolphins, that they're human. And I thought, what?
No, they're super intelligent. Yeah, wouldn't surprise me at all.
But yeah, but like you think, hold on a minute. How can I write saying that dolphins are human? So I then wrote an article specially to do with whales, and in the process, I needed to go and research, and so I discovered that in fact we know hardly anything about whales. Um, we know that about 40 odd million years ago, in Pakistan, they discovered this skeleton where the bones were quite heavy, a bit like hippopotamus. And so, on the basis of that, they surmised that this small animal, sort of rat-like, um, it would go and, because the bones were heavier, it would then sit to the bottom of the river, and it could just walk about till it ran out of breath. And so they said, well, this is where whales come from, and out of that, all the whales, dolphins, everything came into being. Well, as I research into that, there happens to be two different, because Charlie had initially told me no. not all whales are human, only the dolphins. Okay, so as I researched it, um, I came across that there were the baleen whales and there were the dolphin whales. Now, the dolphin whales are the dolphins who've actually grown into whale-like size. But the dolphins, they go all the way from riverbeds all the way through to the sea. So there's a whole variety of them. The baleen whales are quite different because they sieve plankton and krill, and they've got like a baleen plate through which they sieve their food. Whereas the dolphins, they're actually carnivore-like, fish-like. What's the equivalent of a carnivore for fish? Fishables. They're fishables, and and their uh, and their communication is different. So dolphins have managed to create sounds of a very, very complex nature, which the baleen whales cannot do. Although they do create some very haunting songs, but they're quite different. And so as I went back in time, I said, well, how did human beings begin? So as I began to look into that, he said, well, 110 million years ago, human beings, they split up. Some began to live because the weather was very hot, they began to create, because they're already intelligent, they already had intelligence. Um, they still had fur and they had tail. They created um, houses on the lakes on stilts because of the. I thought, well, is this because of the animals, the mammals, predators? Said no, it's because the insect world was driving them crazy, so they went to live in these things, and over a period of a million, 2 million years, they gradually altered because they had been moving from vegetarian towards need for protein. The digestive system had been changing, and they began to eat fish. And so they excelled at fishing, going underwater. And so more and more of their life was done in the water. And so gradually their ability to breathe underwater, not to breathe, but to hold their breath underwater increased. Um, their ability to swim faster, their body, like I said earlier on, the human body is highly, highly adaptable. Our genetics is highly adaptable. And so they gradually adapted themselves to being in the sea. And when a woman went for a mate, she went for one that could hold its breath for longer, could swim further, could bring in more fish. Yeah.
Mm,
So
mm,
those things dictated relationships.
mm.
And as a result of that, they gradually ended up being sea creatures. There, if in my article, I then, because as I was researching all of this, at the end I came across these videos and from the BBC, and this one little video which is amazing. It shows the a dolphin admiring itself in a mirror, but not just admiring itself, but looking at the parts behind itself that it cannot see for itself.
Wow.
And that was real conscious, that was real self-awareness.
Mm,
Quite apart from the fact that they've got a very complex system of words through of sounds to create that by which they create emotional language,
mm,
because dolphins, they don't have mind like we have mind, but they've got a hugely developed emotional language as well as a social interaction. They're group creatures, they're family creatures. They're very respectful creatures, and when they're young, they're very naughty creatures.
mm. That's absolutely fascinating, and I've never heard that idea before, and it does make a lot of sense. They are magical
Read
creatures.
the article. Read the article.
I will do, yeah, I definitely will. I'll look that up, and it would explain. I mean, humans have got a very kind of strong connection with dolphins. When people interact with dolphins, you can see that there's a very high intelligence in those creatures. So
Yes.
that's fascinating. Thanks, Sal. Before we finish today, mate, we should talk about health a little bit as well, because
Yeah,
it's
go for it.
something that you're very clued up on. So, do you ever get clients that come to you and say, "Sal, what should I eat? What should I eat? What should my diet be?"
Yeah. Uh, a prepared question there, because clearly I'm a carnivore. And I think you're on your way.
Pretty much, I'm getting
Uh,
there.
yeah. Well, this is an interesting one, because if I were to put it in a nutshell, I would say everybody should be carnivore. However, because we're so sick, because we've been poisoning ourselves for so long, this is something to be done with knowledge, foresight, and a bit of trepidation. You need knowledge. You need to understand the implications. For example, um, a lot of people who decide to change diet, to go towards carnivore or keto, they do it because they've been putting a lot of weight on. They become very fat. And what isn't so easily recognized is that we become fat often as a result of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which is beginning to take hold within the person. That was certainly true for me. I was 18. I was 18 and a half stone. I'll just show off a little bit, let my ego have a go. I was 18 and a half stone 5 years ago. Okay.
Wow, well done.
My my waist is 31 and a half inches. Um, and I carried a pair of Levi's with me for 40 years, because I'm an optimist. I was thinking one day I'll be able to fit this again. Finally, my wife said, "Look, you've had this enough. Throw it away." So I threw it away, and now I could be wearing them. So you have to be very careful, because one is type 2 diabetes affects the kidneys, um, and it it also, I mean, forget about the type 2 diabetes for now. First of all, it affects the kidneys, but much more importantly, by the time you've got to that stage, you've eaten a lot of oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is a cleaner which has got a tremendous affinity for calcium and metals. And so, because the chances are that you've eaten oxalic acid, in terms of greens, for example, spinach, rhubarb, almonds as well, sweet potatoes. There's a lot of things out there which are very high, chocolate, tea. And so what happens is all of this accumulates in the body. The liver can only deal with 150 milligrams, thereabouts a day.
Mhm.
So the average person may have 1,000
Mm,
milligrams a day.
mm,
And that builds up in the tissues, and it creates long-term illness. Not straight away, it may take 10, 20 years,
mm.
30 years. But eventually, for most people, it creates big problems. Now, you say, okay, well, I'm now going to be a carnivore. Fine. Great. Good idea. You'll be a lot healthier, but you have to be careful. You don't want to make the transition from vegetables to carnivore straight away. You need to do it slowly. You need to reduce your oxalic acid intake
Mm,
roughly around 10% a week.
yeah.
And even when you've done all of that and succeeded, you still got the problem that you may well have around 10 years worth of oxalic acid crystals
Mm,
in your body. And so you need to reduce that slowly, because if you reduce that too fast, you're going to create probably kidney stones or other sort of damage within you.
mm,
Now, I was thinking about this. I'm contemplating writing an article on this little bit. When I was a young lad, there were many other children, including myself, who used to get sleep, encrusted sleep in the eyes.
Yep.
Yeah. And we used to get chamomile. They used to put chamomile lotion to clean the eyes, which was really nice, really soothing. However, what isn't realized, and I know, I mean, now in hindsight, I just twigged that those encrustations that we get in the morning is oxalic acid
Mm.
being excreted from the body through the eyes,
Mm.
which it can also be excreted through the urine, but that was coming through the eyes. And the liver requires vitamin B12 explicitly to break down the oxalic acid. And it can only break down so much a day. So even today, I've been a carnivore for 4 years now. And even today, I still need to eat quite a bit of liver. Not a lot, because, if you have too much, you get the vitamin A problems. But I have a little bit of liver every day because the amount of meat that I eat is not sufficient, even though it contains vitamin B12, is not sufficient to deal with the backlog of oxalic acid, which is being released in my body and is being processed by my liver. So there are pitfalls one needs to be aware of.
Mm.
And if you are deficient in vitamin B12, you will have problems with your nervous system sooner or later.
Mm. And there's a very good chance if you're eating a plant-based diet that you're going to have a significant problem with oxalates or what did you call it? Oxalic acid?
Oxalic acid,
Oxalic acid,
oxalates,
yeah,
yeah,
oxalates, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
They're like tiny shards of glass, aren't they? And when we digest them, they can cause all sorts of problems in the gut, leaky gut
yeah,
syndrome. They're really,
yeah.
I think the worst offenders are spinach and potatoes. I mean, potatoes,
Sweet potato.
sweet potatoes especially, yeah. Um, but when you say you're eating a carnivore diet, do you mean like 100% carnivore? Wow.
One,
Okay.
I've experimented with a lot, and the thing is, I developed leaky gut syndrome, and the reason why I went into a carnivore diet, first of all, before I knew I had leaky gut syndrome, was simply to lose weight.
Mm,
And then I realized that I had a lot of allergies. Um, I was reacting to a lot of foods really
mm,
badly. And it was only after Charlie and I got together that he told me, actually, you got leaky gut syndrome here, and you need to stop eating these foods.
mm,
And so I began an exclusion diet. And initially, I began with chicken. As I was experimenting, I began with chicken and cauliflower and broccoli. But that wasn't good. That just showed me how many more things I didn't need to eat.
mm,
And gradually, I got there. And I will actually do a video expressly to describe my journey,
mm,
because I've done it all. I've done all the ups and downs. I've suffered all the problems. I've learned the hard way.
mm. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. There's a great book out there at the moment actually called Toxic Superfoods. I don't know if you've come across it. It's written by Sally K. Norton, but that
Oh yeah,
focuses a lot
yeah,
on the oxalate issue. And
yeah.
I'm halfway through it at the moment, and it is a big issue for a lot of people. It's really surprising. So
It is.
yeah, I would encourage people to check that out. Um, so generally speaking, we should all be moving slowly towards a carnivore diet. Would our
One second. One
right,
second. Hold on. Sorry.
that's all
Apologies.
right. Live
Uh,
TV.
hello.
Hello. Hi
You're on
there.
the
This is
telly.
Lily calling from comparethemetrics.com. How are
Goodbye.
you
Goodbye. I'm
doing?
very sorry. I'm very busy. Bye. All the best.
Right. Okay. Where was we? Carnivore diet. Yes.
Carnival, yes.
Would what would say we were talking earlier on about, I know it's probably very difficult to answer this question, but we were talking earlier about the pyramids, the megaliths, Atlantis. So if we go back I don't know, a few thousand years, would our ancestors have been eating a carnivore diet?
I believe so, but I don't know. I'll tell you what, live event. Let's bring Charlie into the equation.
Go for it.
If he's there, let me check. Okay, Charlie is here. Right. So the question is, are we going back, 10,000, 15,000? How far back are we going?
Let's say 2,000 years ago. Let's just say 2,000.
2,000 years ago. Right. 2,000 years ago. Well, I can tell you, without Charlie, I can tell you that no, people were not carnivores. And also, which people are we talking about? Because it wasn't one race; there were so many races.
That's true.
If you want to, I would suggest that we go back before the previous cataclysm to the time of Atlantis, and there is a large, let's say we've got 10,000 years. Okay, so as an average over the 10,000 years of Atlantis before the previous cataclysm, were people vegetarians? No. Were people meat eaters? Did people have vegetables? No. Did people have bread, seeds? Were they pure carnivores? No, they were not pure carnivores. Did they? So they had something else other than meat. They had fish. Did they have any? Did they have, apart from protein and fat, did the Atlanteans eat anything else? No. So they were not strictly speaking carnivores because they also ate fish. Did they eat birds? No, they didn't eat birds. Did they eat snakes? No. Did they eat any other animals? So they limited themselves to some animals. Which animals did they limit themselves? Were they the equivalent of cows there? No. Were there something? No. Was there a type of animal that they used to eat? Horse-like, a horse-like animal they used to eat.
Okay.
Was that pretty much that was pretty much the staple. Bear in mind that in those days there was a surfeit of game, of life around them.
Yeah.
So these horse-like animals, did they corral them? No, they hunted them. Okay, so they weren't hunting for them, but they were easy to catch. So it wasn't an onerous thing. They also had fish. They didn't go out on boats. They fished them from the shore. So they had places from which they could get hold of them. So that is an average. That altered somewhat over that 10,000 years, but as an average, that was their staple diet.
So I'm going to ask you or Charlie this now. How do our nutritional requirements now compare to those people living in Atlantis before the cataclysm? Were they very different? Were our requirements very different? Or are we basically the same creatures that need the same nutrients?
Has our physical body changed the need for nutrients? No, it hasn't. So the essential nutrients remain the same. Were they polluted? No. So they were not polluted. So their needs were not the same as ours because they did not have the pollution that we have. So our need for nutrients, is this correct? Our need for nutrients is different because of the poisons that we have built into our environment. I'm talking heavy metals. I'm talking, if you drink water, Even if you drink ordinary tap water, you got fluoride. You've got, I mean, if that water, if you live in London and that water is regurgitated, the antidepressants, the hormonal, the steroids, the painkillers, all the stuff that people take that they wee out through their urine, they cannot take that out of the water. They don't, it's so diluted into the water itself, they wouldn't be able to take that out. So that gets regurgitated. So everybody's medicated.
Pretty much via the water system, that's how and the chlorine in the water is a major problem, I think.
And well, it's not just the water, toothpaste, if you drink Coca-Cola, any liquids you have, they all contain all this stuff. Unless you're very purist, which very few of us are. I'm very fortunate, I think, because I live in 5 and I'm pretty much out of the way. So there's so much water over here. There's no point in them regurgitating the water. It's rain in, as out to the sea. But for most people, they don't have that facility.
No.
So we are poisoning ourselves so much that we require more nutrients. Is that true? Yeah, that is true.
It really
so we require so much more than they did.
That makes
and also the ground in those days was highly fertile. Fertility in the ground comes from animals pooing. You need animals to poo in the ground to recycle. And nowadays, that doesn't happen enough. And then we add all these chemicals to the grounds, and we take the goodness out of it. So we're dying in our own mire. Anyway,
we're all extremely poisoned at the moment to various levels. One of my favorite methods, and it's a relatively cheap method of cleaning up the tap water, is to distill it and then add fulvic minerals and Celtic sea salt to the water, because it brings it back to life. That's something that you can do. You could buy a distiller on eBay or somewhere for about 50, 60 quid. And that's a very cheap and effective way of...
I tried that years ago. I tried that many years ago. I couldn't make it work. The pure distilled water was too acidic. It was too acidic. It didn't taste nice. And I tried to put a bit of salt and a few bits, but I could never really make it tasty. What I have now is, I'm not selling it, but it's what works for us, is, what's it called?
Is it reverse osmosis or?
No. It's, I can't think what it's called. It's, back in a second. Don't go away.
Okay. Tell you what, he's pretty lively for 70 years old. Do you see how he just dashed off like that? Brilliant. So definitely tap water has got to be a no-no. Our bodies absorb the chlorine out of the water so fast, it's frightening. I've seen experiments done. So you really need to avoid the tap water, people. And the answer is, what is it, Sal? You're on mute. I can't hear you.
It's coming on.
Yep, you're back.
Okay, it's called the Berkeley water system.
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah.
It's expensive. It's about £400 or so to buy initially, and then to change the things, it's about £200 a year for the fluoride bit at the bottom, and it's got another one that stops all the biological matter getting in, and that you would do every couple of years. I think you can actually go 3 years without doing it. So it's not particularly cheap, but you have the initial expense, and then you got all the water you need.
Okay, so, brilliant. Sal, we're over the hour mark now, so I'm gonna stop here now. I've really enjoyed listening to you today. It's been very enjoyable. You certainly are very thought-provoking. So I'd love to have you back on in the very near future. I'll
Sure.
be in touch about that. Thanks everyone for watching. Thank you, Nat and Lisa and Pauline, for joining us with your comments. Really appreciate it. I'll be back next week at the same time with Marion Bevington, if she's recovered. And you'll be seeing Sal very soon on this channel again. Where can people find you, Sal, and find out more?
Well, my website, salmarch.co.uk, loads of articles, loads of information. My YouTube video, Salvador March. You could perhaps maybe put a link underneath afterwards to the YouTube. And I've got a Telegram channel, which you're a member of, where I usually discuss, and whenever I produce a new article or a new YouTube video, I always put a link in there, and people are welcome to make comments. Sometimes people ask me questions and we have a chat. So it can be an interesting place to read through.
Fantastic. All right. We'll speak very soon, Sal. Thank you for your time today.
My
Thanks
pleasure.
for watching, everyone. Cheers. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.